So jumping straight into it, Prof, I know that as a professor, you have prepared to present to us. And I think that you actually left us with a very important thought before we went to the break, in terms of challenging our alignment of what we mean by critical minerals and what is not critical minerals, because that will help us solve for how to address any form of skills gap that there is. So I'll hand it over to you now, sir, just to present to us and set the tone for the session.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Yes, I think for Zambia, it's time to take action. I'm here as a Copperbelt University Vice Chancellor, but I also sit on the Battery Council of Zambia, where we are trying to champion battery making for electric cars in Zambia. Because of that, I thought I should first start to see what are the differences between the skills that we have now and what we are talking about, skills in critical raw materials. So I have a short presentation, which I want to do as fast as possible because of time limitation. So I think I can do it here. So as an introduction, I normally put this slide up as an introduction. What we have is a planet on fire, global warming. Studies have shown that really our Earth is warming dangerously, okay? And we have to do something. And you can see, this is Lusaka, even though this year or last season we didn't have much rainfall, but you can see that that is in Lusaka. The flooding that you hear, there's flooding in Valencia, Spain and stuff like that. And so really it means that we have to do something as a global community to cool our Earth down. And of course, I always joke to my colleagues in Zambia or those in the Southern African region who are Christians. We know that God said he is no longer going to end the earth by water, but by heat, by fire. And what does God meant by fire? What he meant is the heat, the temperature, which means you cannot run away from that. And so if you want to go to heaven, okay, you better start thinking about that. And because of this, the world has decided that we should really cool our planet down. How should we do it? This is where the energy transition comes in, by using some of these minerals, which they are calling critical minerals. And of course here, I was showing those clean energy technologies and how this can happen. The fossil fuels going down and the critical these resources are going up. And you can see, here is my president, very, of course, happy about using solar, okay? Solar to have our power, okay? And of course, all these things, okay, they are coming from the minerals. And so there are special type of minerals, not because they are new. Some of them we have been using them. They are called critical because they can now be used in this clean energy, like for solar, which you can see there, the wind, you can use it. But in Zambia and the Congo DR, we decided to go for electrical cars, okay, that battery cars for critical energy. Okay, so, and of course, in this is where we need to have mines of the future. And also we need now, okay, students of the future in geoscience and stuff like that. And of course, this was just a cartoon I put there to show you where some of these critical minerals are found in Zambia, okay? So you can have it. So those are the critical minerals. I'm not going to mention them because of time. Okay, so we move on. Let's move. Hey, before they stop me. Okay, so so what is there on the ground? On the ground, we have on the other part, the left side, this side, you have where you have geological exploration, where it's called upstream, and you have mining. And that mining, this part that you see there, is what has been in Zambia happening for 100 years. Even Mopani, where you are going to go to see Mopani or KCM or First Quantum, this is what they've been doing. And therefore, there are no skills that you are developing in there. You are just enhancing them, okay? Nothing. So, but what you are talking about, if you are going to go into the critical raw materials as we are talking about, we are adding value, value addition. And this is where you need now the skills, okay, that we are talking about. So from midstream, you can see where the midstream there on the screen, you come to downstream, up to the battery itself and the end users, but don't forget the topic where I am now, we are talking about ESG, environment, social, and governance. And that last part there where you see recycling, and the environment that goes through there, plus social, the thing they used to call social corporate responsibilities are all embedded in what we are here for. But I'm not going to talk about that because I don't have time. I will let others talk about that. But I wanted to show you that this is where we are, from midstream to recycling of the batteries, if you are going to do that. And therefore, what it means is that you have a number of skills that are needed. From target, okay, up to university level, you need to develop skills in these areas which you see on top there. Up to the end, the recycling. You can see reuse and recycling. So you need to develop, for us at TAVET and the universities, we need to develop curricula now to train our young people on how to come up with these things so that we can have value addition in Zambia, okay? Because my friend here from Mopani, my friend here from KCM and what have you, they go up to the cathode level, okay? I'm sure. This is that picture which you see here. They go up to that. Okay, now from smelting going inside there, where my colleague from metallurgy, I'm going to put you something there. We can see metallurgy. Okay, you are now involved to come up with all this cobalt, purification and the stuff like that. You are now involved to come up with all these ideas. Okay, and those are the skills which we will need. I think I end there to give other people to talk. Thank you.
Thank you for setting the scene absolutely beautifully for us. So let's get a global perspective then of the guidelines that will be outlining the ESG framework and ensuring that as this value add is happening, it's done in a manner that is responsible and sustainable. Benjamin, good afternoon. So maybe you can just come in here and just give us the perspective of the OECD in terms of the guidelines that you have in place right now, their role, of course, in promoting responsible business conduct in the CRM sector, and how African countries also can benefit.
Yeah, hopefully everyone can hear me. I'm really pleased to be with you today. I was actually in Lusaka a couple months ago, and really sorry I couldn't be with you today in Kitwe. The OECD is an organization, first of all, 38 member states, and we also have many countries that adhere to our standards on responsible business conduct. At the top of this kind of hierarchy of standards, we have a standard called the Guidelines for Multinational Enterprises on Responsible Business Conduct. And this is the most comprehensive standard across different risk areas, for example, on integrity and corruption, as well as conflict, environment, consumer rights, labor, that addresses risks that businesses may be exposed to through their operations or supply chains, and what they can do to address those impacts. Under the guidelines, we have several different standards that are specific to certain sectors. And in particular, in this case, we have a guidance called the Due Diligence Guidance for Responsible Mineral Supply Chains. This was negotiated in 2010 and adopted in 2011. And importantly, this was negotiated with, at the time, 10 and now the 11 countries of the International Conference on the Great Lakes region, comprising Central Africa. And this came about foremost because we sought, and when I say we, I really mean quite a broad mix of stakeholders, including ICGLR heads of government, other stakeholders in the region, including business and civil society, trade and labor organizations, along with international industry and stakeholders, to try to break the link between conflict and the trade in natural resources. This is a guidance that pertains to all mineral resources, so including but not limited to so-called transition or critical minerals. And since that time, several countries in the region and internationally have adopted legislation based on the guidance. But first, briefly, what is the guidance? So this is a standard that is primarily addressed to businesses all along the mineral supply chain to exercise due diligence about their purchasing decisions and their business conduct. And it's made up of 5 steps. So that these steps span how businesses track their supply chains, how they establish good management systems to understand how they're sourcing, where they're sourcing from. Then a second step on identifying what risks may exist in the supply chain. Then a third step on how to manage and respond to those risks. And that's really through the supply chain, not only risks or impacts that they may be causing or directly linked to, but other impacts that they may be linked to through their supply chains as well. There's a fourth step on audits in the supply chain, so on how to actually verify that companies are implementing the standard. And then a fifth step on disclosure, what they should be disclosing to the public at large so that we can promote accountability in the supply chain. And as I said, this standard's been adopted into legislation both in the region and internationally. First, there was actually the Lusaka Declaration in 2010 that endorsed the guidance, and this comprises, of course, Zambia, but also the DRC, Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, Tanzania, several other countries in the region as well that committed to fostering an enabling environment for the guidance. And then several countries in the region also adopted specific regulations, including the DRC, Tanzania, and Rwanda, on supporting implementation of the guidance. Then there are also regulations based on the OECD guidance in destination and trading countries for minerals, including the United States, the European Union, the United Arab Emirates, as well as industry requirements in China and on the London Metal Exchange, so the biggest metals commodity exchange in the world. But I think, while we have these regulations, while we have the guidance as a norm itself, what really counts, of course, implementation. And that's why there are several features of the guidance that relate directly to specific risk areas and how companies should go about addressing them. And that's why I'm also happy that Ian from the EITI Secretary in Zambia is here on the panel. Since the EITI reporting system and the principles of transparency on tax and payments to government, that's really at the heart of how to make sure that countries, mineral producers, are benefiting from their natural resources.
Okay.
There's also
maybe we actually, no, thanks so much for that. And I think you've taken around 5 minutes or so just to help us better understand your processes, the various regulations, the various steps involved in it. And yet we have heard on the ground so far, Benjamin, about the difficulty in actually implementing the complexity thereof. That has been some of the experiences of some individuals, some companies in the mining sector who have shared with us. So maybe, Ian, to bring you in for a better understanding, sir, just in terms of the compliance with ESG standards amongst the companies that you do look at, what has been their experience, and has it been any different to what has been shared in the room so far, being complex and difficult, although there has been a recognition that they are necessary?
No, I think that, thank you very much for that question. I think flowing from the two presenters, it is true actually that the ESG standards are actually quite onerous to achieve because of various, constraints that most companies that are operating in these jurisdictions face. If, for example, we have to pick out, in our situation as Zambia, we have an energy deficit at the moment where we are sitting about close to 80% of hydro. Now, in the current situation where we have a drought, it effectively means that we need to find an alternative source of energy. And I think looking through the licensing database, one begins to see a gravitation towards reactivating coal-powered fire plants. And I think there are quite a couple of active licenses down in the southern part of Zambia, which we'll hopefully see come on stream. And immediately that then has a dent in terms of your E, if we are looking at the ESG. And then also, we are also alive to the fact that this jurisdiction, has been mining for over 100 years. And therefore, we have accumulated a lot of tailings dams and waste rocks, which are natural scavenging points for various people. And therefore, you have that complexity in terms of how do you deal with the social side, especially when you have children involved in that space. So I think that's something that needs to be looked at in terms of how do you balance between your S, having that standard, and also the reality of the fact that we do have child-headed homes in some instances that find themselves in these situations. And then also, I think on the G, which is your governance, it goes without saying that this is a very difficult space to operate in. And I think for the EITI, we have really labored and struggled to really look at how we can address some of the risks, especially associated with licensing. And it even gets more complicated when you overlay this aspect with politically exposed individuals, where you have PEPs, and also in cases where it's very difficult actually to identify the beneficial owners who are behind these licenses. But again, increasingly, we are also seeing risks associated with conflict of interest. How do you just deal with situations where you have the people that are charged with managing, for example, the cadastre systems, also find themselves in really compromising situations? I think this is a challenge. Just quickly to jump on the issue of skills, I do agree quite deeply with Professor Nyambe regarding the need to begin to think of skills that can be useful for value addition. I think we have been extracting for a long time. For the case of Zambia, over 100 years. We need now to begin to look at the downstream opportunities. And those opportunities will definitely need a different set of skills. And I think the role of TVET institutions goes without saying that there will need to actually be a lot of support given in that space. Okay. But I think also when we look at value addition itself, there is a benefit, and I think a consequential benefit, if you like, because if we are able to add value to our minerals here within this jurisdiction, to the level, in the case of copper, of cathodes, it essentially means that we will be transporting less bulky materials. And that in itself is also a positive net contributor to the climate risks. And I'm glad that now we are also talking about corridors, transport corridors. We have the Lobito corridor. One hopes that then the cargo that is endemic on the roads could then be moved on the rail. And then the rail could also be used as a multi-user facility, which will not only save the mining sector, but also look at other ancillary sectors like agric and cold storage facilities along the corridor. Right. Just quickly also to tie it down, Anna, I know I've spent a little bit of time, is the fact that I think for me, ESG is a currency. It's a currency in that for countries and companies that are not going to come to the party, I think it's obvious that they're going to really lose in terms of the value realized from the sale of their materials, because whether we like it or not, there is a premium that is placed on the ESG. I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Okay, no, a great point to leave it, but an interesting point at that as well. And hopefully we'll be able to hear your thoughts further on the currency of ESG and how you think that transaction will benefit those much more that do tick the box. But JJ, maybe bringing in your view here. I mean, we have heard from your colleagues so far, the introductory remarks. What is your thoughts and your experience on how companies are going about trying to integrate ESG into their value chain? And I suppose also more importantly, what skills you reckon are more important to meet these requirements?
Yeah, thank you. And I regret that I can't be there in person with you. I'm calling from Mauritius, so not too far away. But first of all, let me just give 5 seconds to the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance I represent, just a little bit about what the standard is. It's a comprehensive ESG mining standard that covers everything from business integrity to social and environmental responsibility and planning for positive legacies. And it was co-created by a vast array of different stakeholders, not just the mining sector, but also impacted communities, civil society, labor, and also, I think crucially, downstream customers, those that actually buy the mine materials or use the mine materials in their products. And I think that this is important, as the professor was outlining, the demand for minerals is going to dramatically increase with the Green Revolution. It's that also means that more and more people really stand to be impacted. So the kinds of decisions that we make around standards, particularly ESG standards in the mining sector, I think are going to become increasingly consequential. So it's easy to talk about standards, but the hard part is implementing them, as Benjamin started to allude to. And so I think that, you know, when we think about skills that are required, I think that high up on the list is critical thinking and also innovation, because a few fundamental questions to think about. You know, one, which standard or standards should be implemented, because let's be realistic that there are quite a few out there. What are you hoping to accomplish by implementing a standard, and how does that implementation actually become meaningful? When we talk about ESG standards, as I said, there's an awful lot of standards out there, and this complexity is only increasing as more and more institutions, more and more organizations have taken an interest in creating new standards, regardless of whether a gap necessarily exists. And it's all well and good to create those standards, but we also need to still remember that at the end of the day, it's someone's job to actually understand those standards and, importantly, implement them within their company. So are they properly equipped? Are they properly trained? Are they properly resourced to manage that implementation? And aside from that, is it even clear that what needs to be implemented? How are we providing that clarity within the standards ecosystem? And unnecessary duplication, overlap, and complexity, I think, only makes the jobs of those people even more difficult. So the more that we can simplify, or rather not overcomplicate ESG standards, I think that we're standing in better stead for them to be well implemented. But I think we also have to ask ourselves what we're trying to accomplish with standards, because if the point of a standard is to check a box, then it's not removing risk in the supply chain. Now, I come from the consumer electronics industry, where I managed mineral supply chains. And, you know, if you're going to all the trouble of implementing a standard, are you actually changing anything? Because from a customer perspective, if I have risk in my supply chain, I want to be able to identify that risk, and I want to be able to either mitigate it or remove that risk. And a seal of approval on a mining operation status quo is not going to do that. If a standard simply rewards the status quo, that's not fixing the existing risk. So a high bar standard, I think, is what's going to more effectively address risk. So recognizing what represents best practice and understanding how to meet that, I think, is a key element. But also, I think we think of standards potentially in the wrong way, because too often they're thought of as a burden or a cost center, when rather they should be thought of as something to improve a business's operations, to make it more sustainable, to make it more durable. Mindset matters in strategic decision making, and if you think of standards as something that's separate and apart from a company's core operations, or if you think of it as a test to prep for, then you're not going to see that strategic long-term gain.
Sure.
And of course it's difficult, it should be difficult, but I think we should be thinking about whether it's achievable. Sure. And that's where we really have to think about how we're resourcing the people responsible for implementing standards to really be able to do it effectively.
Okay. JJ, I don't know if you disclosing your location to us, being Mauritius, was to spark envy amongst us in the room. But nonetheless, thank you so much for that intervention. And I'm wondering whether we are doing this conversation the correct justice by looking at the whole ESG complex and basket as one. We're describing the complexities of implementing ESG into the value chain as one. And I just wonder if there is room to maybe think differently about the different components on ESG and maybe the experience of companies when it does come to the environment, or when it does come to social, or when it does come to governance, is different compared to the other. We heard Ian actually speaking about the governance element, a little touching on that, which was really interesting, but this is just maybe a question and a thought for yourselves regarding ESG. Maybe we can get to it in just a short while. Lauren, to bring you in as well, and maybe you can just reflect on the experience of members and beneficiaries within the organization, and what they are feeling right now and how they are going about complying with these standards.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I'm not there in person. I am not making anyone envious here from
are you in the
gray
Seychelles?
and dark Stockholm. No, I am in gray and dark Stockholm, so nobody should have envy about the weather here. But I just wanted to say one sentence about NIR, who we are, so everybody knows sort of my perspective. So we are an NGO. We're based in Stockholm, and we work in the nexus between the private sector and development cooperation. So we are owned as an NGO by Swedish industry, which of course plays a heavy role in the mining sector globally, but our operations are funded by the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, so SIDA. So I'm going to probably talk a little bit more from the development cooperation perspective, but I think I was asked to talk about sort of what the challenges are and things like that. So I think from our perspective and the way that we see it, the challenge is that, and I think a lot of the speakers have already touched on this, that ESG, sustainability, responsible business conduct, all the things we can call it in this space, it's hard. As we've heard now, these lots of standards and there's more coming. It's expensive. And not enough resources are usually dedicated to addressing ESG or responsible business, and it takes a lot of time. And I think this is true no matter where you are in the world, whether you're in Zambia or in Sweden. So I think this is a global challenge when we're talking about ESG. Obviously, it hits a little bit harder in low and middle income countries because of oftentimes there's even more of a lack of resources. But I think when we talk about ESG, I think it's important to remember that it's hard everywhere. I mean, you can talk to the big Swedish multinationals and they'll tell you also how hard it is from their perspective. So it's nothing unique, I think, to sort of the low and middle income setting, but it becomes harder because it's compounded by other factors. And then I guess sort of on the challenge side, another challenge that we see that is maybe a little bit more applicable in the low and middle income setting is that ESG, sustainability, responsible business conduct, is often less so, but it's changing, but still not quite to the extent we would like to see. It's not built in as a key corporate function, and it's not usually treated as a cross-cutting topic across the business. Rather, it's something that's usually just owned by the environmental and social team or the SHEC team that doesn't have a lot of face time with senior management and or the board of directors. So this means that ESG sometimes gets siloed and is just dealt with sort of on the project level or in relation to a specific financing package where it's a requirement by a lender. So sort of one way that we like to see this is sort of what can we do with our partners to ensure that ESG is cross-cutting across the corporation or the business, and how we can make sure that senior management and leadership understands sort of what Ian was talking about, but sort of understands the value of investing in ESG and how that really helps you to remain competitive, especially as we have all the upcoming EU legislation on due diligence and sustainability, and others are likely to follow.
Sure.
But I also wanted to just talk for 1 or 2 minutes about how we don't want to get hung up too much just on the challenge side, but also sort of especially from the development perspective, how we can see these ESG challenges also as opportunities. So sort of where can we see, like this now I'm very talking sort of at a specific mine. Yes, there are challenges, but are there ways that we can leverage those challenges and also turn them into opportunities to have a positive impact? So for example, I was at a mine a couple weeks ago in Zambia, and they're obviously being hit quite hard by the energy crisis. But then they're developing plans to set up a small solar panel on their concession and to set up a small grid to both obviously feed into the mine, but also to feed into the community around the mine. So sort of how can we take these challenges? How can we take the energy crisis and turn them into positive impact also for the environment? Or on the social side, how can we support mines? Let's say there's at the same mine, they have a lack of female mine workers. How can we support the mine with upskilling of the female workers to ensure that more women in the community are able to be employed at the mine? So also trying to not get too hung up just on the challenge side, but how we can turn these challenges also into opportunities for more inclusive development.
No, fantastic.
And I think I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I like the mindset also that you're trying to cultivate for us to look at both sides of the coin here. Yes, there's a challenge, but there's also an opportunity to solve for it. And maybe, Juan Pablo, you can bring us in as to the work that UNIDO is doing and how you are trying to assist member countries and partners also in overcoming or turning the challenges of ESG integration into the value chain into opportunities.
Thank you, Vivi. It is a difficult time after lunch to be in this room, but I'll try my best not to.
Some people eat too much, now they're falling asleep.
Yes. No, thank you very much for the question and for the interventions of the other panelists. I think it's very, very important. It's the very complex subject, and at UNIDO, as we are a UN agency, specialized UN agency for industrial development, this is at the heart of our interventions because we work directly with industry. And we try to see what are the demand from industry. And we were looking this morning also what is the demand doing and how can we align the different efforts and especially the skills to satisfy that demand. I really like the overview of the value chain, the exemplification, because that can brings us to really see where in the value chain are we situated. And if we see the value chain, we will see the ESG as different dimensions along that value chain, from the very beginning of the mine sector of the exploitation to the beneficiations, to the different steps. There are similar requirements on ESG, but not the same requirements. So in order to have a sustainable value chain, each actor of the value chain needs to understand exactly what is demanded at the next step of the value chain so they can comply, whether it's environmental, whether it's social, and of course in levels of governance and transparency. And the ESG, if you look at it, really has some similarities to the Sustainable Development Goals. In the Sustainable Development Goals, we look at people, planet, and prosperity. The social is the people, the planet is the environment, and the prosperity, maybe not one-to-one, but we can see is how can we make sure that enterprises and industry are profitable and business are profitable without impacting the social well-being of their stakeholders and the environmental where they work. For UNIDO, we look at all these standards and initiatives, and we try to make a distillation process because, as it was mentioned, it is difficult for multinational companies. Then can you imagine how difficult it is for the countries where we have most of our work in developing countries? So we try to do a distillation process, including the different stakeholders from the private sector to understand exactly what is required by the ESG. What are the different requirements? Well, maybe 90% are similar, but there may be that 10% that may be distinguished from market to market or from product to product. In the morning, we talk about the co-creation of curricula with industry because it's a demand-driven approach. And we did this exercise, and I will not anticipate myself I will not be a spoiler because we are going to talk a bit more of the UNIDO LKDF sustainability curricula. But the process was exactly that, the co-creation of a curricula looking at what are the needs that industry is looking right now and try to disaggregate and make a distillation process so it's a very condensed set of topics that industry needs to take into account. It is not the standard, it is not necessarily a guidance, but it is a compilation of what are the thematic topics that need to be taken into account at each step of the value chain, not only for critical minerals, but because this applies to any value chain. So in that sense, this is one of the initiatives that we're doing. Another initiative that we have, and we have launched this early this year in Saudi Arabia, is the Global Alliance for Responsible and Green Minerals. Mm-hmm. And this alliance aims to provide knowledge and capacity building for sustainable development in mineral supply, which involves as well development of skills required and the standards compliance to them. And I'll stop here.
And I think it also goes without saying that many people in the room are looking forward to hearing a little bit more about this curricula that has been mentioned twice now throughout the day. Prof, I'm going to bring it back to you as you did set the tone so beautifully, just breaking down the different elements of the value chain where the skills need is the most right now and where we perhaps have sufficiency. From an educational side then, maybe just talk to us about the School of Mines and Mineral Sciences from the Copperbelt University. What's going on there in terms of training the next generation of leaders in the CRM industry and leaders who are able to of course integrate ESG within that value chain a lot easier than current leaders are experiencing.
Thank you, moderator. First of all, what I want to start is to say thank you to the mining industry on the Copperbelt. I don't want to mention names, but all of you have been very supportive to Copperbelt University. And I'll be starting a tour to pay courtesy call to all chief executive officers of our mining companies on the Copperbelt and see how we can work with them. Yes, I know as a School of Mines, the Mineral Science, as Copperbelt, working together with the EV Battery Council, as I indicated before, we were charged with coming up with curricula. Together with Tavet, my colleague here, we were together in Congo, working together with Mumbashi and ourselves to see how those skills I was talking about, how we can now add value to our cathodes. The ones that are very known is the copper one. Okay, but these other metals, FQM and others, they've discovered large reserves of nickel. My colleagues in Luapula, they've also got large reserves of manganese. And so all these will now form a set of these critical raw materials. And Zambia is set, okay, working together with Congo to have this battery for the EV batteries. As I'm speaking now, if those slides were not cut, I could have even shown you the curricula that you have been working together at university level with Mumbashi University. I could have even shown you the curricula which my colleagues at Tavet, they've also been working together. They are on that presentation, she has it, Anna. So for all of you who want it, get it. because for us, we want your input. Okay? For all of you, including the mining industry, we want your input in that because Zambia is serious. We want value addition. My colleague was on the TV here, indicated, just mentioned Lobito Bay. There is also a lot of geopolitics in these critical raw materials because it's not only going to be Lobito Bay, it's also going to be Sazala. The Chinese want to modernize Sazala. And for us as CBU, we also have an engineering program that we learn at Mpika in railway system engineering because we want to prepare our students for these things that are coming. Okay, in Solwezi and other areas, we also have some things that are happening there to prepare ourselves working with our company colleagues in Northwestern Province. For those here, Mopani and others, of course, they are actually on our Senate to also look at some of the programs which we try to push out. So that's what we are trying to do on the academics, including TAVET on that. And of course, I would like to also say that as Zambia, we have chosen Ndola to have a special economic zone for this EV industry. And I'm now appealing to UNIDO and the CEDA, please come and work with us. Some of this money that you are channeling here, channel us to our universities. Okay? To put these things in progress, to put them up. So channel that money to us as well. We would like to work with you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So that's great feedback. In fact, there's even going to be a point in the session throughout the afternoon where we'll actually ask your feedback and maybe ask the kind of things that you would like to see UNIDO do a little bit more, and obviously they'll review and they'll see what's within their capability and what's within their means. Before we begin to wrap up the session and concluding remarks, does anyone have any question here in the audience, any input that they'd like to add? I do see a hand there at the back. All right, okay. And just an announcement, I say this everywhere I go, but if another phone rings, if it's yours, the penalty is 1 Bitcoin. You've seen the price, it's a serious one. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to ask a few questions.
Yes, ask. Good one.
I'll be sending the invoice.
Okay, thank you so much for this forum. I am learning a lot. For me, I just have a few things that I've taken note of, and just maybe 2 or 3 questions on both the supply side and also on the demand side. As we all know, Africa does face a few challenges regarding critical raw material supply chains, and some of these include infrastructure deficits, limited local processing and value addition, dependence on foreign markets, and regulatory frameworks. I think this is something that we can all agree that Africa faces, the challenges that Africa faces. But my questions now are coming on both the supply chain, the supply side and the demand side. So my first question on the supply side is, what are Africa's CRM reserves, and how can they be accurately mapped? This is for, I don't know, the metallurgists, is it?
But Ian also made reference of a cadastral system, so I wonder if he might know a little bit more about that. But also, any of the players in the room who do have that answer, just feel free to also show your hand and we'll come. Otherwise, we'll get back to you.
All right. My second question, how can local processing and value addition be increased, especially in Africa? My third question on the supply side is, what investments are needed to improve infrastructure and logistics? I know we've talked about so much mining and all that artisans and all that, but we're also asking on the logistics side, how then can we improve some of those processes rather? On the demand side, I just have maybe 2 questions. What are the key sectors that drive CRM demand in Africa? So we're talking about renewable energy as well as electronics. And secondly, how can African manufacturers be encouraged to use local CRMs? Because all I hear is, oh, we're taking out raw materials and we're transporting them out. But what about our own local manufacturers? What are we doing to encourage them to use some of these CRMs? Those are my questions. Thank you.
Sure. Sounds like an ASAR student there. I'm afraid of those questions, me even. Very, very serious questions. Any of the speakers, would you like to make a contribution to them? And maybe if I can also see some of the online guys, feel free to let us know if perhaps you'd like to respond. Prof, I see that you were leaning to get a mic. Is there any way in you'd like to, any comment you'd like to say? Go first. Would you like to go first? Okay. Yeah, Ian, go ahead, and then we'll come to the floor.
Oh, thank you. I want to go to talk about the first one, CRM, the reserves and other things for Africa. One of the problems that we face when it comes to reserves is that our figures tend not to be very factual. What we need is that those people that have the figures should come out open and say, this is what we have. For Zambia, this is why the government of Zambia has that geological exploration program where they are going to fly the country. I'm sure you've heard about it, so that we can map the country to try and ascertain what sort of critical raw materials we have, whereas we can have a knowledge on copper and a little bit on cobalt, and the one on the nickel and manganese. The others are still very vague. And this is why CBU, for example, we also are starting a project, a program, curriculum program, where we are trying to bring in AI, working with the University of in America, okay, together to teach AI and others in the geological exploration and big data. Okay, this is to prepare ourselves for exploration, for targets, to try to use these methods to explore things like that. The other thing that I would have shown you in that video, in that presentation of mine, was that we are also working with the University of Oulu and others in Finland and others, using drones to do some of the exploration. And this is, don't forget, all these materials that we are talking about, they are wasting asset, what we used to call the reserves UNIDO. But if you are going to continue using them for such things, you really need to get these reserves. You need to have continuous exploration so that you have the reserves on code. That's the only part I can shed some light on.
Okay. Okay, no, thanks so much for that. I hope there was clarity there. But I think maybe, as the Prof has alluded, a lot more minds and data will be needed to answer you there 100%. But Ian, I know you wanted to come in here as we address some of those demand and supply related questions that did come from the floor. What would your intervention be?
Yeah, I mean, I think just building on what the Prof raised, the reserves really, I think they need to be looked at in several dimensions. We ought also to be aware that some of these reserves could be found in electronic waste. And I think we need to be deliberate in terms of how do we harness what has already been mined, that which is already either in tailings dams, waste rocks, or indeed in electronic waste. And I think that is why it is critical to begin to think regional. so that the risks that are inherent in one jurisdiction, when the region comes together, hopefully the risks will be mitigated in that regard. And I think we're also grappling with the issue of sequencing risk. I'm not very sure whether the sequence is ESG or GSE, because literally what you find is that the G is at the core of everything. If your governance is not working, your social and your E is definitely going to suffer. And I think that's one perspective we need to be alive to. And then just quickly in terms of the standards, and I think the various speakers have made a very compelling point. My view is that we ought to begin to move towards convergence of standards so that we can consolidate the gains that have been made. I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. And maybe to the speakers who are on the virtual call, even here in the room, if anyone can just signal by way of hand, if you would like to make an intervention regarding the investment opportunity. So I would think that you spoke about the investment opportunity in the local CRM space, extending also to logistics and related industries beyond mining. And I think that, amongst that was it, right? Okay, and the other questions regarding reserves, you're happy with that answer. So if there is anyone at a point in time that would like to reflect on it, please feel free to do so. And maybe you can do so when, or as we enter into our closing remarks, just again, bearing in mind time for this discussion. So Benjamin, I'm going to bring it back to you as we do wrap up. Just your final thoughts on this discussion. And the ease of implementing, if any, in future.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the interest in investment is really crucial here, and really goes to the heart of, whether standards are perceived to be a burden or something that helps unlock finance. I think to be realistic, obviously, implementing standards, it takes time, it takes resources, but I think we see in many cases, obviously, that the region provides huge opportunities to invest in CRMs and value addition, importantly. But I think what we hear is to get a lot of potential investment and investors, whether it's multilateral development banks, other kinds of bridging finance, private investors, to sort of get off the sidelines. They also need tools to be able to engage in contexts that they may not be used to. And that's really, I think, where our standards come in, which is really a norm. It's not themselves, they're not the auditable industry standards that actually, compliance folks are looking at. And I think more than anything, in some ways, we need to get away from a compliance mindset. We need to be looking at the most severe risks, practically speaking, what can we do to mitigate them? There's no such thing as a risk-free context, whether that's in North America or whether that's in Southeast Asia or Africa or anywhere. And so I think we do need to focus on those ways in which, by implementing responsible business conduct standards, creating a level playing field for their implementation, we can actually pull some investors off the sidelines and into where they're needed. And I think, that relates to the informal sector too. And this is really an opportunity we need to keep attention focused on. That finance, if deployed responsibly, can really help not only improve conditions for people and environment and society by helping formalize the informal sector, but can make it more productive too. So I think that's a potential boon for implementing standards. I'll leave it there.
Fantastic, thanks so much. JJ, just final thoughts from you?
Yeah, no, nothing particularly new, because I think that we've had a lot of alignment between the speakers. I think I would just, again, reiterate the need for, thinking about who actually has to implement the standards, and realizing that standards, regardless of how good they may look on paper, they live or die by their ability to be implemented effectively. But at the same time, I think that we need to make sure that we are implementing the highest bar of standards possible, because, you know, to Ben's point, otherwise, you know, we're not changing anything. We're not improving. We're not de-risking our supply chains. One other quick point I would make, in a discussion for another time, but I think we really need, and just Ben alluded to it, I think that we really need to think about the connections between upstream and downstream, particularly, and not just upstream and downstream in terms of customers, but also thinking about the input of investors, and thinking of how we influence companies to move in the right direction and to adopt the standards that are going to lead to better business practices and ultimately to better outcomes at the site level.
Okay, fantastic, JJ. Thanks so much for that recommendation, a point to follow up in future. Lauren, just your concluding remarks.
Sure. It's a little bit funny because we hosted this morning actually here at NIR, Zambia's PS for International Relations and Cooperation. And the main thing that we were talking about was sort of what's been alluded to here now at the end, is sort of how can we all work together, and sort of what can we do to be a good partner, and what sort of joint collaborations can we have for ESG preparedness to unlock financing, so between government, development cooperation, business, ICAs, IFIs, and DFIs. So it's sort of a nice way to round off here. But I think my main thing is that just sort of also sort of on the partnership side, sort of how can we ensure that we're good partners and transfer the knowledge and skills for ESG preparedness to ensure continued competitiveness, and yeah, especially with the upcoming additional standards that we're all talking about here, but sort of just really on the partnership side, that sort of we think that that's key, and that, you know, in these contexts, no one single actor is going to be able to manage all the risks by themselves, but it's something that we really have to all do together through joint collaborations and partnerships.
Okay. Point duly noted. Ian?
Yeah, I think in one word for me, we need to turn the risks into rewards. And I think, as already mentioned, there's no region which is devoid of risks. And it's just a question of managing those risks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Nice equation there, turning the risks into the rewards. Prof, final thoughts?
Yes, final words. We don't want another cowboy. Going by the topic that we are looking at, we want those of our investors that we invest in these critical raw materials. And should we find another depot, lithium, whatever, please remember, ESG, environment, social, and governance. These are standards that you have to follow to make sure that we avoid another cowboy. My fellow Zambians know what I mean by saying another cowboy. And lastly, the only thing I would say, please join us. We have our Copperbelt University Challenge. This side we have exhibitions, so please pass at our booth and join us. My fellow Zambians will know what we want to do. We want to modernize Copperbelt University. Okay, and of course, I'm also again appealing to my UNIDO and the CEDA. Don't forget us. We are in this together. Thank you.
And last but not least, Juan Pablo.
Thank you. I guess I have to formally answer that we are here for member states, and it would be a pleasure to support the initiatives, because I think we're all aligned in the same direction. It will be a difficult path, perhaps, but I think if we go together, we can go far. Rather than being alone, we can go fast, but I think we prefer to go far than fast together.